Hey, welcome to Sane Game Studios' second video. I am Sane, an amateur game developer. I actually already recorded this once, but when I uploaded it to YouTube, it was super blurry with the text, and you couldn't really read what I was doing. And there's no way for me to fix that besides re-recording. So here I am. Today we're going to look at just basic movement and controls for a platformer game, and then once we get the movement working the way that we want it, we are then going to add animations so that our player looks like they're walking and looks like they're jumping. Um, with that, we can pretty much get into it. I'm going to do a little bit of explaining on what this all is, just in case you're brand new to Gamemaker. So first of all, this right here, this is the workspace. Obviously, it says workspace up there. Essentially, what this is whenever you're working on anything, or whether you're creating an object or creating a sprite, the um, the window for doing all of your editing and all of your creation is going to appear in this space. And as far as I know, this space is endless. It goes for infinity. You can have as many windows going up, down, left, or right as you want. I try to keep it down to just a few, and once it gets really really big, it can start to slow down the engine and whatnot. But yeah. So anyways, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go over here to the asset browser, and the asset browser is where they store everything that you add to your game, whether it be objects, scripts, custom functions. You got shaders and sprites. Today, all we're going to be looking at is sprites and objects, and then also putting it into a room. A room is a level. Whenever you start a new project, which is what this is, brand new project, nothing in it. I've even named it blank game up here. You'll always have one room, and that room is a level, and GameMaker needs to have at least one level in order to work. It won't. I don't even think it will let you delete your only room. But yeah, so with that, first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna look at sprites. So to create a sprite, you just hover your mouse over sprites and you right click, go to create, and go down to sprite. Right, and then yes, this window will pop up. Like I said, it's in the workspace. And I'm just going to label this S player. GameMaker prefers if you name things SBR player, especially with objects. I just go O, like I'll go O player. It will want you to go OBJ player. And once in a while, when you're writing code, uh, it'll have like a yellow scribbly line underneath it, and it will just come up as an error saying inconsistent naming. That's not something that will affect compilation whatsoever, and you can name things however you please. So first I'm going to do is I'm going to alter the size of this sprite. I don't want it to be 64 by 64. The height and the width is always done in pixels, but I'm going to keep the resolution for this pretty basic, and my room I'm going to keep default size, which is fairly small. So for that, I'm just going to make it 32 by 32. Right here, you have this thing called maintain aspect ratio. And if this box is ticked, then whatever you change one to, it will change the other one as well to maintain whatever aspect ratio you have. So if I go like that, see they both go to 32. But if this was 64 and that was already 32, and I had this box ticked and I changed that to 32, then this would change to 16. It does whatever it needs to do to maintain its aspect ratio so you can alter the size of your sprites without creating any kind of distortions. So I'm going to hit apply to apply those changes, and I'm going to go to edit image, and I'm just going to make a square. I'm going to use a fairly vibrant color so it's easy to see, and I'm going to do that. And as far as I'm concerned, that I'm happy with that. There is my player. I'm going to close this. I'm going to make one more sprite, and I'm going to call this one S wall. And then I'm going to change the aspect again to 32 by 32. I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to edit the image, and I'm going to choose another vibrant color that is distinctly different, and I'm going to call that done. So with that, we have images, and that's all that sprites are, is just images. You can't, sprites can't interact with each other. They can't have code attached to them, nothing like that. They're just images. And then if you want them to be able to interact or move or do any of that kind of stuff, you need to turn it into an object. So I'm going to go right click on objects. I'm going to go create. I'm going to go down to object. I'm going to create a new object. I'm going to call it O player. And then for the sprite, I'm going to set it as S player. Then for the collision mask, I'm going to set it same as sprite. Actually, I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to talk about collision masks. So if you go here and you tick collision mask, you'll see that it darkened. That is the area that so when you have an object and you attach it to a sprite, that object will be like an entity now. They call it an instance. But the collision mask essentially is the space that your instance occupies in the game world, right? So like with the image, you throw an image in, it's just an image. It doesn't have any um, like substance to it. Like there's nothing to it. When you turn it into an object and you create a collision mask, then all of a sudden it actually has a space that it takes up in the game world. And like you can overlap them and you can stack them, but when it comes to something like bumping into something else, it is going to use the collision mask that you set to decide whether or not that actually happens. And you can change the collision mask. I can go manual and I can alter its size. For like combat systems and stuff, I usually use a slightly smaller collision mask because you're better off to err on the side of caution. But yeah, so that's collision masks. That's what they are, and that's what they do. So now we have an object, and it has a sprite attached to it. As it sits right now, nothing's going to happen. Actually, I'm going to create one more object right now while we're here, and I'm going to call this one O wall, and then I'm going to attach a sprite S wall. Collision mask again, same as sprite. And that's all that there is for that. We're not going to attach any code to that. We're not going to have the wall do anything. We're going to have the player object interact with the wall. So you just need the wall to exist as an object and have it have a collision mask. So when you place it in the game world, it actually occupies a physical space and it exists. So with that, we're going to start getting into events. And there's a lot of different types of events. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go key pressed, and I'm gonna go letters and R. And all that is if you press the R key. And Sarah Spalding actually showed me this trick, and it comes in very handy, and I highly recommend using it. But I'm going to take this, let's throw the code up here. Let's increase the font a bit. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go room restart. So when I'm playing, anytime that I press the R key, I'm going to restart the room. And that's really nifty when you're first building mechanics in case your player object goes off camera or something happens that is irrevocable, like you're absolutely screwed. Then you just press R and it resets the room to its initial state. That's all we're going to do in that event. Next, we're going to start a create event. And the create event is essentially it's just whenever this object is created, it will run this code once at the moment of creation. And 90% of the time, I use this to declare variables, and that's all I really use it for. You can use it for other things if you just have code that you want to execute once when this object comes into being, then you can put it there. When it comes to declaring variables, however, you can also do it in this window. I personally don't use this, but it is very useful, right? You can just, add a variable. You can be like, walk speed, and then set it to 4. And the thing that's really nifty about declaring variables this way is when you're in the room, let's say you have a bunch of enemies and you have all your variables declared here, and you want your enemies to move at different speeds or behave differently, then you can actually select that enemy in the room, alter the variables, and it will alter the variable for just that one specific enemy, and the rest of them will maintain their initial values. So it is really useful there. For the purpose of this video, however, I'm going to do everything in the create event. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, like I said, just start declaring variables, and I'm going to start off with our movement variable. So I'm going to go key up equals false. And then if you have no idea what this is, I'll take a moment and I'll explain it. So like a variable is legitimately just a key phrase that holds a value. And when you set it to something like true or false, it becomes a type of variable called a Boolean, which is why it says key up bool. And what that does is it returns a value of either 0 or 1. And if it's 0, it's false. And if it's 1, it's true. And yeah, that's about the gist of that. But I'm going to do that for a few more. I'm going to go key down equals false. I don't think we'll be using key down in this video, but if you're going to declare movement, you might as well declare 4 directions. I'm going to go key right equals false. I'm going to go key left equals false. And then from there, I'm going to come down and I'm going to declare a few more variables. I'm going to go HSP equals 0. And what HSP is that to me that just says horizontal speed. So I use this variable to determine how quickly I want my character or my player or whatever to be moving along the x-axis. And then this variable is called, this is a real variable, which means that it just represents an integer, and which is just a number, and you can have it be any number you want. I can make this variable be negative 10 quadrillion if I wanted to, but you would be moving very quickly in just one single direction, and nobody wants that. So next I'm going to be doing VSP. I'm going to set that to 0. And it's the exact same thing as HSP, but instead of it being horizontal movement, it is vertical movement, vertical speed. And that's how quickly you'll be moving up or down on the y-axis. And then from there, I'm going to set a few more. I'm going to say walk speed equals 4. That's just an arbitrary number. You can do any number you want, but the higher the number, the more quickly you will move. I'm going to go jump height, and I'm going to equal that to -7. I'll explain why -7 later on. Again, it's mostly just an arbitrary number. I find 7 to be a good jump height for the resolution that we're working at. And then I'm also going to set grav. Now you can do gravity. I would advise against it because gravity is it's a constant variable that exists inside of Gamemaker, right? So if you set gravity to something, then I'm not 100% sure how it works. Like, I could absolutely be off my rocker and completely wrong, but I think that it affects overall gravity. So whenever you are, like, if you use gravity, and then you can just use gravity somewhere else, and it will use that value of gravity. And when you alter gravity, it will alter gravity for everything. I could be wrong. Like I said, I've never used it, but I'm going to set that to 0.3. And then with that, I believe we have everything that we need. So I'm going to go back to the workspace. I'm going to go add event. I'm going to go down to step, right? And then what step is a frame, right? So the game will run on it's a very common term called FPS, and that's frames per second. It can also be first person shooter, but in this sense, it's frames per second. And that is how many frames that your game executes every second. I believe that Gamemaker actually defaults to 30 frames per second. I like to run it at 60. If you want to change that, you just go up here to game options, and then right here you can set game frames per second. So I'm going to take the step event, I'm going to put it up here, and then I'm going to figure out player input. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go key up equals, and I'm going to go keyboard check pressed. Now there's a few of these, as you can see. There's keyboard check, and keyboard check is if you press a button, it will be true, and then if you release the button, it will become false. And then keyboard check pressed, when you press a button, it will be true for that single frame, and then it will start returning false. And then keyboard check released is the same thing as keyboard check pressed, but instead of it being true for a single frame when you press it, instead it is true for a single frame when you release it. They're all like there is more obviously, but those are the ones that I've played around with so far, and for everything that I've done, they've been everything that I need them to do. Depending on what you do with your game, you might have to play with some new ones. But for this, I'm going to go keyboard check pressed, because when you jump, you only want to jump once. And I'm going to set that to VK up. And that stands for virtual keyboard up. And that is just the up arrow on your directional pad. If you want to instead use like W for up, which is also very common, you just go ORD, create a couple brackets, put in a couple quotation marks, and then you would put a W, right? And then ORD is just that's what you use to send a letter value into keyboard checked pressed, and it requires you have a string, and a string is a variable value that is between quotation marks, and it becomes yellow like this. But you can also use that for like drawing text and stuff like that. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to use VK up. And then for key down, I'm going to go keyboard check pressed. I'm going to go VK down. We probably won't use key down in this video. Actually, I can tell you definitively right now, we will not be using key down in this video, but I always just declare it. And then for this one, key right, I'm going to use keyboard check. That way, it will hold true the whole time you're holding the button. If you use keyboard check pressed, it would only be true for the moment that you press it. So then every time that you press it, you would calculate movement and you would move, but you would only do that for one frame. When we're moving, we want to have it be moving the entire time we're holding the button, which is why instead we use keyboard check. It will return true as long as you're holding the button, and then once you release the button, it will then return false. And I'm going to set this one to VK right. And then for key left, I'm going to do the same thing, keyboard check, and I'm going to set that to VK left. And now, when we run our game, well, if we were to run our game right now, the game would know that we are pressing buttons. It wouldn't do anything because we haven't told it what to do when we press those buttons, but the game will now recognize when we press buttons. And from there, we can start telling it what to do, which in this case is going to be calculating movement. And we're going to start off with horizontal movement. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a comment, and I'm going to say horizontal movement. And you can do a comment at any time by doing 2 forward slashes. What a comment is it's code that doesn't get compiled. So it will never have any effect on your game whatsoever. If at any point in time, like you're troubleshooting or you're debugging or whatever, and you want to have a line not be ran, but you still want it to be there in case you still want it, you can comment it out by doing that. And then all of a sudden, when your game's playing, it will skip over this line and go to the next one. I use it all of the time when I'm trying to figure out what's going wrong with my stuff. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to declare a local variable. And you declare the local variable by typing var and then the variable. I usually use a underscore for this. This is also the exact way that Sarah Spalding taught me how to do this in her video. But yeah, I always put an underscore before a local variable so that I know that it's a local variable. Gamemaker also does regular variables in blue and then does local variables in a pale yellow. But what a local variable is that outside of this, like this chunk of code, this variable doesn't exist. And when it runs this code, which is every frame, when it runs it, it will create this variable and it will set it to the value that we tell it to. And then when it's done its frame, like when it's done running this code, it will then delete that variable. And then when it runs this code again, it will recreate it. As far as I know, because of the fact that local variables are constantly being deleted and recreated, they take up less memory. So like if like with this variable, the game saves the value of this variable constantly, always. It will always know what the value of that variable is. The game forgets this variable every frame and then resets it every frame. So it doesn't require nearly as much memory to maintain it. And then what I'm going to do with this one is you're going to have to bear with me for a second here. I'm going to go key right minus key left. And what this does is with key right, if that is true, it will return a 1. And then if key left, like if you aren't pressing the left key, that will return a 0. So you'll get 1 minus 0, and then move will equal 1. But if you're holding the left key and not the right key, you will get 0 minus 1, and you will get negative 1. And then if you are holding neither key, you get 0 minus 0, which is equals 0. And if you hold them both, you get 1 minus 1, which also equals 0. So in both those instances, you wouldn't move at all. And now we can start using HSP to calculate our movement. And I'm going to do that by just going HSP equals walk speed multiplied by move. And then to actually affect the movement, I'm going to go x equals itself plus HSP. And what this is going to do is if we are moving right, if we're holding the right key, this is going to return a positive 1. So then the HSP is going to equal the walk speed, which is 4, times 1, so it'll be 4. And then in every frame, we will move the x coordinate by positive 4 pixels. So every frame will move forward 4 pixels. But if we hold the left key, move will return negative 1. So it'll be walk speed times negative 1, in which case HSP will end up being negative 4. And it would be x plus negative 4, which equals minus 4. Right? So then every frame will be moving negatively by 4 pixels on the x-axis, and that will have us moving left because positive on the x-axis is right and then negative is left. So then if I go to my room now, we can actually run this. I'm going to create a super simple level. It's not going to be anything fancy. And then I'm going to throw my player object inside of it. And then I'm going to hit F5. And see, we can move. But as you can see, we don't have any gravity, which is a good thing we don't because we would fall right through the floor. And we also don't collide with the wall. We move right through it because we haven't written any code to tell it to even do anything when those two collision mass or bound boxes actually like collide with each other. So actually the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set our vertical speed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go VSP. So I'm going to go if key up equals true. I'm going to say if that's true, I'm going to have VSP equal VSP plus jump height. So then if you press the up key, the VSP will be added to, well, the jump height will be added to your vertical speed. And then jump height is -7. And that's because in your room, this is 0, 0, 0, 0. And as you move right across the room, you go up in the X value. And as you move down across the room, you move up in the Y value. So by moving negatively on the Y axis, we will jump and we will move upwards. But with that, all that's going to happen is if you press that, you're just going to move up 7 pixels. What we needed to do is we need to have some sense of gravity. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that VSP is also equal to itself plus grav. Right? And what that does is that means that as you move negatively, which is up on the y-axis, every frame is going to add 0.3 to the VSP. So you will move up slower and slower and slower. And then when you eventually reach 0 VSP, you will no longer be moving upwards. And then when it adds gravity, it will then start moving downward. And you'll start accelerating downwards towards the ground. And then we will update our y-axis. So y equals y plus VSP. And honestly, with that, we'll start falling and stuff. We can move side to side while we're falling. But as you can see, we fall right through the floor because we haven't set any collisions. So let's get on that. Let's start doing that now. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set a collision for a horizontal movement. And it's really important that you set the collision before you update the x-axis. Otherwise, it will not even take the collision into consideration because it's moving before the collision is detected. So you need to detect the collision, and then if the collision is not happening, then you can update the x-axis. So what we're going to go is we're going to go if place meeting. I'm going to go x plus HSP y O wall. Then I'm going to open up some squiggly brackets. I'm going to go HSP equals 0. Now I'm going to explain all of this. So first thing is if. If is a very handy thing and probably one of the most common things that you will do while coding. It essentially just says, if this, then that. It's pretty simple. It just asks you, if this condition is met, do this. Then place meeting says like, if you are touching, and then you tell it touching where and touching what. So what I'm saying is if we are touching object wall on the x-axis at our current height, set the HSP to 0. And the reason why I go x plus HSP is because you want, instead of just like figuring out whether or not we are currently touching the wall, we are going to figure out whether or not we are about to touch the wall. Because let's say hypothetically that your movement speed is 10 pixels per frame. What's going to happen is if the wall is only 5 pixels away and you go to move and you don't have this here, then you're going to move those 10 pixels. But because the wall is only 5 pixels away, you're going to end up 5 pixels inside of the wall, in which case you will be place meeting and your HSP will equal 0, no matter what you do, even if you hit your arrow keys, right? So it puts you inside of the wall and then you can't move anymore. So by doing this, what we're doing is we are predicting whether or not we are about to hit it. And if we will hit the wall by our next move, we don't want to make that move, otherwise we'll end up inside of it. And that's what you need for starter collisions. And then for Y, we are going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to say if oh, not place empty, if place meeting x, y plus VSP, O wall, squiggly brackets. Oh, extend squiggly brackets as well. VSP equals 0. Right? So with these squiggly brackets, if you create a statement like this, you could just go VSP equals 0, semicolon, and that will work. And if you only have one code for if this condition is met, then that is fine. But if you open up a set of squiggly brackets, then what'll happen is you can have multiple lines of code. You can be like VSP equals 0 and grav equals 10 quadrillion, and like that will be, they will both execute if this condition is met. Actually, one more thing. When you're coding, always end your lines with a semicolon. That is how Gamemaker knows that you are done that line. Because I could go VSP equals VSP plus grav, and that will work. But I need to put the semicolon there to know, so that Gamemaker knows that this is all one line. It is a very forgiving language, so like if you that would still run, but it is good practice to make sure you have it. I'm pretty sure if you miss enough of them, Gamemaker will get confused and things won't work nearly as well. Oh, also right here, I'm going to add another comment, and I'm going to say vertical movement. And actually with that, we land, we touch the wall, we don't go through it. And if we go over to this side again, we touch the wall and we don't go through it. And you probably can't see it in the video, but there is actually a very tiny gap in between the player sprite and the wall right here. It looks like it's only 1, maybe 2 pixels wide, so it's very small. But that is something that happens, and a good way to prevent that is up here in your horizontal collision. You would just add a while statement. And while statements are dangerous. So with a while statement, whatever you put between these two brackets will execute, like everything after this will execute as long as this condition is met. So you need to make sure, this is very important because you can crash your game or even cause it not to run in the first place, that while statements do come to an end. And if at any point in time they don't come to an end, or if they have multiple ways of coming to an end, then you have to put in break statements like that, and that will break the while loop. But so while we are not place meeting x plus sine HSP, y O wall, x equals x plus sine HSP. And I'm going to explain this line now. Okay, so first of all, this exclamation point right here, it legitimately just means the opposite of what comes after it, right? So like, for example, if, so like right here, you have key up equals true. I don't actually need to write key up equals true. If I just go if key up, then Gamemaker will automatically assume that I want to check if it's true or not. But if I do that, I will be asking it to check if it's false. Right? So if you put in a exclamation point, it legitimately just flips the meaning. So right here I have if place meeting, but by adding this exclamation mark right here, I am now asking if you are not place meeting. And then sine HSP is what sine does is it takes the value of whatever you put in the brackets in front of it, and it looks at where it sits in comparison to 0. So if HSP is less than 0, the sign of HSP will be -1. If it is 0, it will be 0. And if it's above 0, it will be +1. So all I'm saying here is if we are moving in the positive direction, so above 0, um, if there is not a place meeting 1 pixel ahead of us in that direction, increase our position by 1 pixel in that direction. Actually, another thing that's important is now that I've done that, I need to move this HSP equals 0, and I need to make sure that it happens after this line. Otherwise, HSP just equals 0. Oh, equals. And that closes up that gap. But we still have one more issue. So if we go and we start jumping, I can double jump, triple jump, quadruple jump. I can jump to infinity. So now we need to figure out how to get it to only jump if we are on the ground. And that's actually a fairly easy thing to do. So we could run this check again. And we could be like, if key up, and then also underneath it, we can be like, if place meeting. So I can be like, if key up, if place meeting x, y plus VSP O wall, VSP equals VSP plus jump height. That will do it. But collision checks, especially when you start having a lot of them and your game gets a lot more complicated, get expensive on the CPU and they use up a lot of computing power. So instead, I am going to add a new variable. So I'm going to go to the create event and I'm going to create a new variable and I'm going to call it grounded. And I'm going to set that to false. And then I'm going to go to the step event again. And right here where it says, are we touching the ground? Are, place meeting on the ground? I'm going to set grounded equals true. But sitting like this, once we touch the ground, grounded will be set to true and it will stay true forever. So what I need to do is I need to go else. And else is something you can put after any if statement. And it says, if you have if this, but if not, right? So if place meeting, I want to be grounded. But if I'm not, I want grounded to equal false. And then here, if key up, then I'm going to add a second condition. I'm going to write and grounded. So this is actually a very useful thing, this and. So with if statements, you can have multiple conditions set for them. And instead of and, I could actually also do 2 ampersands. And that does the exact same thing. But if I want something to run if this is true or that is true, so I don't need both, I need one or the other, I can go or. But I can also put in 2 lines like that. But for this, I want both conditions to be true. So I'm going to set it to and. And then I'm going to hit F5. And I can no longer jump to infinity. I can only jump while I'm on the ground. And then for horizontal and vertical movement, that's the basics. That's what you need. That will get you running and jumping, and it makes your game interactable. But I don't want to be a pink square the whole time that I'm playing. So I'm going to fix that. And to fix that is rather simple. I'll show you guys how to do that. I'm going to go to sprites. I'm going to go to create sprite. I'm going to label this as S player idle. Then I'm going to import an image. I'm going to find my idle animation, which is right here. Actually, a really cool thing you can do with Gamemaker is like, okay, so right here I have a sprite with 3 frames. I could rename this, and at the end of the name, I could just go underscore strip 3, and it will automatically split this into 3 frames when it's imported. So here I have character, no weapon, idle, strip 8. So when I open this, it automatically splits it down here into 8 strips. And if I hit play, it just starts playing. But he looks kind of antsy. He looks like he's got some anxiety, or like he's fuming mad or something. Look at the way he's bouncing into his shoulders and stuff. I'm going to change that. I'm going to slow it down a little bit, make him look a little bit more relaxed. So up here you have frames per second, and that is how many frames this animation is going to run in a second. I'm pretty sure that GameMaker defaults it to 30. I've changed my setting to default it to 8, but I'm going to change this to 8, and then we'll play it. And look, all of a sudden, he doesn't look nearly as mad. He looks like he's just relaxing, chilling, doing a bit of a bob as he stands there. And that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. So now I'm going to create another sprite. I'm going to call this S player walk. And I'm going to import an image. And I'm going to look for the one of him walking right here, strip 10. I'm going to open this. Automatically splits into 10 frames. And look at him go, walking along, his dangly arms, freaking swinging back and forth like they're wet noodles or something. And yeah, I'm going to call that good. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to create another sprite. I'm going to call this S player jump. I'm going to import an image, and I'm going to look for him jumping. Jump, strip 6. Automatically splits it. I'm actually going to slow this one down as well. Look, there he is jumping. It looks stupid when he's not actually moving up in the air, but in the game it'll look a lot better when you actually see the change in movement as he does it. And then I'm going to add one more. I'm going to import an image, and I'm going to grab fall, strip 4. Let's set this one to 10. And there he is, looking like he's falling through the air, his hair waving in the wind and his arms waving in blissful ignorance. Perfect. And I'm going to set this one to be S player fall. So now we have sprites. We have to tell it when to use those sprites and how to use them. So the first thing we're going to do is right here, before we calculate any kind of movement, I'm going to say sprite index is equal to S player idle. And sprite index is just how you, with code, go into here and grab a sprite. So I don't actually need to change the sprite. It's still going to be this little pink square. But as soon as it starts existing, it starts running code, it's going to change its sprite using sprite index, and it's going to turn it into S player idle. And then I'm going to go into my horizontal movement, and I'm going to say if HSP does not equal 0. Because if it equals 0, then we're not moving. So if we are moving, I want to change the sprite index to equal S player walk. Simple. And then down here, I'm going to say if grounded equals false, and then I'm just going to open up curly brackets here. Because I wanted to check for the sprite anytime that we are not currently on the ground, and then I'm going to tell it which sprite to select based on our direction of movement on the y-axis. And I'm going to use VSP to do that. So when you jump, your VSP becomes a negative number, and then gravity slowly turns it into a positive number. So if I'm moving up, which means I'm jumping, that means my VSP is going to be lower than 0. So I'm going to say if VSP is less than 0, sprite index equals sPlayer jump. Else, which is any time that we are not on the ground and VSP is not less than 0, I'm going to say that sprite index is equal to sPlayer fall. And that is almost everything we need. Almost. I'm going to show you an issue that we're going to have immediately. So I'm going to press F5. I'm going to go in there. And look, there he is, bobbing upside down, just chilling. Then if we start walking, he starts walking. And if I jump, he jumps. And when he hits the top and he comes down, he starts falling. The only issue is when I start moving left, he doesn't turn around. He's still walking in the right direction with his animation, but the actual object, the character, is moving to the left. And that's a really easy, quick thing to fix, and we don't even need to bring in a new sprite for it. So here, when I use sign HSP, and I said that, when I told you that it returns either -1 or 1, we can use that value to manipulate our sprite to face the direction that we need it to face. So I'm going to say if HSP does not equal 0, so we are moving, we're going to set the sprite index to sPlayer walk. But I'm going to take the image X scale. So image X scale is how you manipulate the size of your image width, right? So like if it is set to 1, then you will have a normal looking sprite. If you set it to 2, it will stretch out with width and it will be twice as wide. If you set it to 0, it will have no width and the sprite won't draw at all. And if you set it to -1, then what happens is your sprite gets flipped horizontally. So it's like it's standing in front of a mirror. It faces the other way. So we can take this sign HSP right here, and we know that if we're moving to the right, it's going to return a +1. But if we're moving to the left, it's going to return a -1. So if we plug this value into our image X scale, then we will be facing the right way when we walk. And that is legitimately all you got to do. Super simple. So moving right, moving right. Then he turns around and he moves left. Moving right, moving right. Turns around and he moves left, right? And that is all you got to do. That is the basics of just getting a sprite to be controlled, to calculate the movement, and then also to animate it. And then from this, you can, these are the building blocks that you need to start doing some pretty crazy complicated things, and you can build really great games. And movement is a huge part of building good games. So yeah, with that said, I'm just gonna say thank you so much for watching. It's only my second video, so I'm still getting used to doing this. If you liked this video, I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. But yeah, with that, I hope to see you guys next time and have a good one. Peace out.